this video, we're going to show you instructions on how to make block 8. We are getting ready to stitch block 8B. And to do that, the supplies you will need is, of course, your battleizer. I have mine hooped up and ready to go. You will need a piece of fabric 1, fabric 2, 3 small pieces of fabric 3, fabric 6, and 2 pieces of fabric 7. You will also need your thread A, your thread C with a bobbin, your thread D with a bobbin, your thread E with a bobbin, your thread F with a bobbin, and thread G with a bobbin, plus your Vanish Light thread. Let's get started. For step 1, I put a contrasting thread in the needle, and we're going to stitch the placement stitch onto the battleizer. Optional batting time. So if you opt to do the batting underneath your stitching on your blocks, this is what we recommend you do. This is a little square of wool batting, and what we recommend you do is place it on your ironing board, put a press cloth over it, and then with your iron, just press the 4 edges. You can see through the press cloth. So I'm just pressing the 4 edges. It compresses those and keeps your foot from getting caught on the batting when you stitch it down. So you can hopefully see the impression here. So when I peel this off, we put a press cloth on because it will stick to your iron otherwise. So we have nice compressed edges along the edges of your batting. So do that first before you continue on. So as you can see, I have my batting laying on top of my battleizer inside my placement line. Hopefully you can see the compressed edges. I have wash away thread in the needle, and I'm going to go ahead and start, and the machine is going to baste, kind of do a zigzag baste around the edges to hold down the batting. And the reason we use wash away is so it actually will go away after it's stitched, so it doesn't add a layer of bulk, doesn't add any color, you won't see anything. So step 3, we will place fabric 7 over our wool, making sure we have a 1/2 inch extended, and then we will use water soluble thread and baste down this fabric. So once we're finished stitching in this area, we need to trim it. So I'm going to trim, leave about 1/8 of an inch, and I cut it off about right there. And next step, for step number 4, we will place our fabric 2 in this lower corner, again extending a 1/2 inch past the seam allowance, and we will baste down that fabric. So I've gone ahead and stitched down fabric 2, and I've gone ahead and also trimmed it. This scrap right here we're going to save for later, for step number 8, where a little daisy gets placed in the corner. So we'll just put this little scrap aside until step number 8. I've gone ahead and stitched step number 5, again keeping with the water soluble thread, and this is the placement areas for step number 6. So step number 6, we take fabric 3 and we place it over each section, and we put it back under the machine and stitch the tack down. Here's my tack downs from step number 6. I've begun to trim them away, so I'll go ahead and do that, and we'll be right back for the next step. So I've trimmed my appliques very close around all the edges. I want to point out that this edge right here, it extends into the seam allowance, so we must leave some fabric in there so we have something to sew to. And I've gone ahead also and stitched step number 7, which is the placement stitch for that scrap of fabric from step 8. So we're moving along real quickly. We'll take this white piece of fabric that we cut off here earlier, and we'll just place it up over this little daisy in the corner, and the machine will tack it down. So I've stitched down in step number 8 my fabric 2. Again, I've trimmed it very close for an applique inside the block, and I've left the fabric within the seam allowance on the outside of the block. I've gone ahead and stitched step number 9, which is the placement, for step 10. And on step 10, we take fabric 1, we place it over the placement stitches, and still remaining with water-soluble thread, we stitch the tack down. So I've tacked down step number 10, which was my fabric 1 flower. I've gone ahead and trimmed it nice and tight all around all the edges because it is an applique. For step 11, we need thread F in the needle only, and we will stitch a decorative stitch inside the flower and also some little satin stitches up in this area. For step 12, we place thread D in the needle, and the machine will stitch the satin stitch around the daisy petals. Step 13, we will place thread E in the needle only, and we will do some decorative stitches on the daisy as well as some satin stitches down in the lower left corner. For step 14, we place thread A in the needle only, and it'll stitch the satin stitch around the flower in the center and some more of this type of detail in this area. For step 15, place thread G in the needle only and stitch the decorative stitches. For step C, we will place thread C in the needle only and we'll stitch some more decorative detail up here. For step 17, place water-soluble thread in the needle only, and the machine will stitch a placement stitch up in this area right here. For step 18, you will take fabric 6 and place it over the open area and the placement area from the last step, covering both areas, and the machine will stitch a tack down stitch. So I've gone ahead and stitched step 18, so now it's time to go ahead and trim fabric 6. You will trim it very close for applique around the entire section. Here's a look at our trimmed applique from step 18. Step 19 is to turn the hoop over and place the back on and baste the back with the water-soluble thread. Step 20 is the start of the quilting part of our block, so if you have the feature of turning off your automatic thread cutter, now would be the time to do it. Then you will place thread E in the needle and the bobbin and begin the quilting. Step 21, we will place thread F in the needle and the bobbin. We will stitch the satin stitching around the applique area. Inside the applique area will be some of Sharon Schomburg's beautiful quilting. Step 22, we will place thread C in the needle and the bobbin, and we will stitch some more quilting. Last step, step 23, we will place thread G in the needle and the bobbin. So we have our completed block 8B, and it's time to trim it. All 4 edges of this block get trimmed with a trimmer by George. So to do that, we fold back this raw edge and we take the trimmer, kind of shimmy it up, fold it flat, make sure we have no fabric sticking out, and we rotary cut off the battleizer and the backing. And we will do that on all 4 sides. And once we get the battleizer and the backing trimmed off, you can see it's not on the back of the block at all. We turn it over right side up again, and we turn our trimmer by George over, and we have our 1/4 inch seam allowance that we need to trim. So we place the 1/4 inch line on the basting line around the block, and we do that on all 4 sides. And there we have our completed block 8B.